Imagine a world where family ties were so powerful they could dictate your entire life. A world where the web of kinship was so vast and complex it could connect you to almost anyone, and where your position in that web determined your fate. This is the world of Lambert of St. Omer, a medieval scholar who lived over 900 years ago. His book, the Liber Floridus, Book of Flowers, is a fascinating glimpse into a time when family wasn't just a matter of blood, but a complex tapestry of relationships that could make or break you. Lambert was a chanoine, a type of clergyman, at the Church of St. Omer in what is now northern France. His Liber Floridus is an encyclopedia, but not like the ones you might know. It's a mix of science, history, and religious teachings, all woven together in a way that was meant to explain the world. But what really stands out is how much of it is dedicated to genealogies, lists of who is related to whom, going back generations. In Lambert's time, family wasn't just a personal thing. It was a matter of power, status, and even religion. For example, he believed that the kings of France were descended from the legendary Trojans, the same people who fought in the Trojan War. This wasn't just a fun story. It was a way to legitimize the rule of the French kings. If you could trace your family back to heroes and gods, you had a right to rule. Lambert's book is filled with these kinds of genealogies. He lists the descendants of Adam and Eve, the genealogies of biblical figures, and even the lineages of the Counts of Flanders and Normandy. But it's not just about kings and nobles. Lambert also includes the genealogies of bishops and popes, and even some of his own family members. He believed that these connections were important, not just for history, but for understanding the divine plan for the world. For Lambert, family wasn't just a set of blood ties. It was a way to understand the world and your place in it. He believed that the end of the world was coming, and that understanding the genealogies of the past could help prepare for it. This apocalyptic view was common in his time, and it colored much of what he wrote. But the Liber Floridus is more than just a list of names. It's a visual book, with illustrations and diagrams that show the connections between people. One of the most famous is a genealogical tree, or genealogia arbor, that traces the lineage of the world's rulers. This tree isn't just a list. It's a visual representation of the divine order of the world. Each branch and leaf represents a person, and the way they connect shows how the world is structured. Lambert's world might seem strange to us, but it was a world where family was everything. The relationships between people were not just personal. They were political, religious, and cosmic. For Lambert, understanding these relationships was the key to understanding the world itself. In the next chapter, we'll dive deeper into the Liber Floridus and explore how Lambert's views on family and kinship shaped his understanding of the world. But for now, just imagine a world where family ties could make you a king or a prophet, where the connections between people were as important as the connections between the stars. This is the world of Lambert of St. Omer, and it's a world worth exploring. Understanding medieval kinship is like peeling back layers of an onion. The more you explore, the more you realize how deeply it was intertwined with the beliefs and social structures of the time. Historians have often treated kinship as a straightforward biological fact, but that's only scratching the surface. When we dive deeper, we uncover a rich tapestry of relationships that were shaped by spiritual, mystical, and divine beliefs. In the Middle Ages, people didn't just see family ties as connections between blood relatives. Instead, they saw kinship as a reflection of a divine order, where all humans were connected through a spiritual network. This network was created by God, who, according to their beliefs, had a plan for humanity that was written in the stars and traced through genealogies. For them, kinship wasn't just about who was related to whom. It was about how those relationships reflected a higher, more profound truth. This way of thinking about kinship wasn't just a Christian idea. It had roots in classical antiquity, where philosophers like Plato and Aristotle saw the family and the household not as basic units of society, but as reflections of the larger, more complex structure of the city and the cosmos. When Christianity became dominant, it took these ideas and transformed them, emphasizing the idea that all humanity was connected through a divine kinship. This meant that the ties between people were not just physical, but spiritual and mystical, binding the human to the divine. One of the most fascinating aspects of medieval kinship is how it influenced the way people thought about property and inheritance. Today, we often assume that property should be passed down to blood relatives, but in the Middle Ages, things were different. Monasteries and churches were frequent recipients of property, not just because they were important institutions, but because they were seen as part of a larger spiritual family. Donating property to a monastery wasn't just a practical or charitable act. It was a way of reinforcing spiritual connections and ensuring that the legacy of one's family would continue in a divine sense. This spiritual dimension of kinship also affected how people thought about their own families. For example, Duoda, a medieval mother, didn't assume that her son would automatically inherit her husband's property. Instead, she believed he had to earn it by proving himself worthy, suggesting that inheritance wasn't a given, but a privilege that had to be earned through good deeds and moral conduct. As we move forward in history, we see that the way people thought about kinship continued to evolve. By the early modern period, kinship started to take on more familiar forms, with a focus on patrilineal descent and the transmission of property through bloodlines. But even these changes were built on the foundation of the earlier, more spiritual understanding of kinship. The idea that all humans were connected through a divine plan didn't disappear. It just took on new forms. So what can we learn from this? Kinship is not just a set of rules or a biological fact. It's a way of understanding the world and our place in it. It's a way of creating and maintaining social bonds, and it can change as societies change. Just as medieval people saw kinship as a reflection of a divine order, we today see it through the lens of our own values and beliefs. Whether we think of kinship as biological, constructed, or something else entirely, it's always a product of the way we understand ourselves and our relationships with others. In the end, kinship is a bit like magic. It's a powerful force that can bring people together, create bonds, and shape the way we live our lives. And just as magic can take many forms, so too can kinship. It's a reminder that the way we see the world is never fixed, but always evolving, and that the connections we make with others are what give our lives meaning.